The Bee in the Blackberry Bush by Charles S. Harrison. Illustrated by Don Lee. Author's dedication. For my daughter, Elizabeth Michelle, always my little one. Illustrator's dedication. To my brother Garrett for his support and patience through a tough season, and to my kids, Noah, Rachel, Joshua, and Michael, for inspiration, and to Julia for so much more that can be listed. Acknowledgements. Thanks to all those who have encouraged me. To my friend Garrett Lee, who helped me edit this book. To my illustrator, Don Lee. To Rob Young, who helped with the audio portion of this book. To God, who's given me the gift of story, and to my wonderful wife, Michelle. The Bee in the Blackberry Bush. In a small forest on the edge of a farm, there lived a busy little bee. She was just a worker in a bee colony. Every day she went out and gathered sweet nectar of flowers and blossoms. The colony used this to make into honey. Honey was their food. The bee didn't have a name. She didn't mind. None of the bees had names. They just had their jobs, and they were happy with that. One day the little bee saw a bird flying high in the sky. She wondered what it was like to fly so high. The bee was not sad that she wasn't a bird. She was just curious. Besides, she knew her job, and she was good at it. The little bee brought in more nectar than any other 3 bees combined. She watched the other bees dance. This is the way bees talk. The dance told her where more nectar was found. As soon as she knew where to go, off she flew. One day she saw the dance of a bee that told of a large group of flowers in a blackberry patch. Blackberry blossoms, she knew, made the best honey. So off she flew, without waiting to hear any more. The other bee had not finished the message, so our little bee did not hear its warning. She flew to the edge of a farmyard. She had never been there before. She was amazed by the huge number of flowers. She looked and saw she was the only bee there. She wondered why the other workers had not come. She didn't waste any time. She began to gather nectar. She started near the ground, as was her habit. When she reached the second flower, she found out why the other bees hadn't followed. A chicken pecked at her. She flew to the right just in time to keep from being eaten. Suddenly, she found herself surrounded by a dozen chickens, all trying to get her. She flew as fast as she could, first this way, then that, each time barely escaping. She finally flew up, out of their reach. All this made her very tired. She decided she needed to rest. She flew into the middle of the blackberry bush and landed. She looked around and saw she had landed on the edge of a small bird's nest. The nest held 2 small eggs. She knew she was in trouble. Where there's a nest, there's a bird, and some birds eat bees. The next moment she was held down by the feet and claws of a bird. She knew she was about to be eaten, but to her surprise, the bird just stood there holding her. She thought she heard the bird crying. She didn't fight, but instead listened to the sad sound the bird made. "Why are you sad?" asked the bee. An insect had never spoken to the bird before, but the bird was so sad she did not even think how strange this was. "A cat grabbed my mate," said the bird, "and now there is no one to watch over my eggs while I get food." The bee felt sad for the bird. "I'll watch them for you," she volunteered. The bird released the bee and gave a small laugh. "What could you do to protect my eggs?" The bee knew exactly what to do. Buzzing as loud as she could, she flew around the head of the little bird. "Okay, okay," yelled the little bird. "Please stop." The little bee stopped and landed on a nearby blackberry blossom. "Why would you help me?" asked the little bird. The little bee did not know how to reply. She only knew it felt right inside. The bird waited for an answer. The bee finally gave her the best one she could. "I think if my queen needed help to watch over her hive, I would want someone to do it for her. So if I would want someone to do it for her, then I should do it for someone else." The little bird took this in thought and seemed to agree. "I have work to do," said the bee, "but I can spare some time to help. May I get nectar from the flowers on your bush? Of course, but when will you be back? Asked the hopeful little bird. Not long, you'll see. The little bee gathered all the nectar she could carry and flew out high enough to avoid the chickens and returned to her hive. The little bee never considered breaking her promise to the bird. She quickly stored away the nectar and flew back to the nest. I'm here, said the bee. Thank you, said the little bird. I won't be long. And away she flew. The little bee watched until the little bird returned. Thank you, chirped the little bird. You're welcome, said the bee. When will you need me again? I'll be okay till tomorrow. The little bee felt good and flew off to gather more nectar. The bee did this for several days. To her surprise, she still brought in the same amount of nectar as always. The bee and the bird always talked before and after the little bird's trips. The bee told how happy she was to make honey. She also told how wonderful she thought it was that birds could fly so high. The bird told her how the birds communicate, each in its own way. She taught the bee how to hear the different messages the birds sang out in the morning. One day the bee was heading for the blackberry bush when they heard the call of a blackbird. The blackbird was close and was saying it had found food. The bee dove into the grass, thinking the bird was coming after her. It was. The blackbird landed very near the bee. With its mouth open wide, the blackbird went after the little bee. Suddenly, her little bird friend flew close by the blackbird's head, yelling, "Get away!" The blackbird snapped at the little bird but missed. The little bird flew back around, diving at the blackbird. The blackbird had enough and flew away. Thank you, said the little bee. You're welcome, said the little bird, flying back to his nest. I must get back. The eggs are hatching. The little bee followed as fast as she could and sat for a while, watching the little mama bird tend her young. Do not get too close to them, warned the little bird. They will peck you. The little bee did not get close. The bee and the bird continued their routine of watching and gathering food for several more days before the newborn birds realized they were not to peck the bee. One morning, a little girl came out to the blackberry bush. The little bee had seen her playing with the chickens. Today, she was not chasing the chickens. She was looking at the berries just coming on. The bee flew out and buzzed the little girl. The girl swatted at the bee, but the bee kept flying around her head. The little girl yelled, jumped, and finally took a swing at the bee, but hit herself instead. The crying little girl ran away. The bee went back to the cheers of the young birds in the nest. When Mama Bird returned, she heard the story from the excited young birds. Mama Bird chirped a song of thanks to the little bee. The little bee returned to her chores, happy she was able to help. The bee and the bird continued taking turns watching and working. The blackberry bush had fewer flowers now. The bird told the little bee of other flowers she had seen. The little bee never fell behind in her work, getting the nectar to the hive. The other bees were only concerned with getting nectar for the hive, so the little bee never thought about telling them what she was doing. Finally, the bee returned to the nest to find only one little bird. Where is your brother? Yelled the concerned little bee. Mama has him out, said the excited little bird. She's teaching us to fly. The little bee smiled. Then she heard a sound. A cat had heard the bird and was sticking its head into the bush. The bee flew at the cat and buzzed around its head. This distracted the cat for a minute. The bird in the nest chirped, and the cat remembered the reason for being in the blackberry bush. It reached with its claws and swiped at the little bird, but missed. The little bee flew and landed on the nest, yelling at the cat, "Go away!" The cat did not listen, but reached in again. The bee could see the cat was going to get the young bird, so she flew over to the paw and did the only thing she could think of. She stung the cat. The cat yelped and ran off, limping with its hurt paw in the air. The little bee flew over to the nest and fell inside. "What's wrong, little friend?" said the young bird. "I put my stinger in its paw," explained the bee. "Can you grow another one?" "No," came the answer from the mama bird, who had just flown in. She had seen the cat limp away and knew what had happened. "Once a bee loses its stinger," explained the mama bird with sadness in her voice, "it will not live very long." "What can we do?" asked the young bird. Mama bird thought for a moment and then remembered something the little bee had said. "We will let her be a bird." She took the bee by the wings and flew high into the sky, higher than she had ever flown before. The little bee saw the world from high above like a bird. The little bee smiled to herself. "This is wonderful," she thought. "Thank you," said the little bee. Later that summer, the little girl returned to the blackberry bush with her mom. They found the little bee lying in the middle of the nest. "Why is this bee here?" asked the little girl. "I don't know," replied the mother. The birds knew and never forgot the sacrifice of this unusual friend. There is no greater love than this, than to lay down one's life for a friend.